Hey, I'm Blair Best. Tonight on The Story, we begin outside one of the city's tiny home villages for homeless people in southwest Portland. Come this summer, the staff that runs this site will be replaced.
It's incredibly traumatic.
But I think there's going to be chaos for a while.
What's behind this seemingly sudden change and what it means for those staying here, trying to get back on their feet? It's our big story tonight. Behind these walls is a life after homelessness.
Look, this is my first time ever doing anything like this.
This man moved into this southwest Portland tiny home village about 4 months ago. Now he's got a job and is on his way to housing.
So I don't know, that's one more step on the road towards independence. Yes, ma'am.
And it's all thanks to the staff, he says, at the Multnomah Safe Rest Village.
See, these guys do things like keep you focused on stuff, you know?
We provide wraparound support services and housing.
Andy Goebel is the head of the Portland-based nonprofit Sunstone Way, which has run the village since it opened in 2022.
We've been putting a lot of effort, a lot of work into operating this village. We have upwards of 30 staff who work here.
Earlier this month, city officials told Andy that come July 1st, Sunstone Way will no longer operate the site.
We were shocked, obviously extremely disappointed.
Andy's group runs 5 shelters across the city, including 3 safe rest villages. They say they've helped more than 560 people transition into housing.
And to learn that very suddenly we won't be operating this village is just really confusing and upsetting, especially to not be given any kind of specific reason for that.
It all comes down to contracts. That's according to a spokesperson for the city of Portland. Currently, Multnomah County holds the contract for this site. The city will take that over July 1st, and they are looking to replace Sunstone Way with the California-based group Urban Alchemy, which runs other similar Portland shelters. But this puts the current Sunstone Way staff at risk of losing their jobs.
We will do everything we can to find other positions for folks within the agency, and those that we can't find a position for, we're going to have to look at doing layoffs.
But beyond the staff,
I think it's going to affect a lot of people here.
people like Steve.
I've been here since November 15th.
Steve relies on his caseworker, who's helped him find not only a path forward, but also stability.
I see mine every Wednesday, you know, at the same time. Since I got her, I haven't missed one day. Everybody's on a first-name basis. You know, these people know these people that they deal with, you know, on a daily basis. But when you get all brand new people, everything starts all over again.
That instability, Andy says, also threatens the site's relationship with the surrounding neighborhood, one that's even protested the village in the past.
In my opinion, it's been going quite well. We were worried at first.
Yeah, and we've done a lot of work to really form relationships and push past those barriers and gain trust from people who initially didn't trust.
I just hope that whoever runs it keeps doing a good job.
People adapt, but I think there's going to be chaos for a while because these people are coming in here have no idea what's going on in here.
And this isn't the only shelter site provider that could be replaced come July 1st. The city is taking over several sites that Multnomah County currently handles contracts for, and those include Multnomah Safe Rest Village, the one we just told you about, Weidler Village in Northeast, Southwest Nato Village, Menlo Park Village in East Portland along Burnside, and the Sunderland RV Safe Park in Northeast. That site's future depends on the upcoming city budget. In February, the city opened an application process for providers to apply to run these sites. They're negotiating with the highest scoring applicants. As far as for the Multnomah Safe Rest Village, the city appears ready to replace Sunstone Way with the California-based group Urban Alchemy, but that's not 100% final yet. A spokesperson for the city of Portland sent us the following statement saying in part, quote, "The city of Portland has immense appreciation for the work being done by our site operators and their staff. The city of Portland is committed committed to making the transition to any new site operator a smooth transition. Now, for its part, Urban Alchemy told me today they are deeply rooted in the fabric of this community. They've been selected for each of their contracts based on their proven ability to help people rebuild their lives. In a statement, they go on to say, we've supported more than 1,000 Portlanders and helped over 200 transition from homelessness into permanent housing. Now, when I was at the site, I saw Urban Alchemy staff there. Apparently, they are already doing a street outreach in that area, and they told me they even share the same office space as the Sunstone Way staff. So, what do you think about switching up shelter providers? Let us know. Email the story at kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090.
How are you, Joe Biden? How are you?
Well, that was the moment a mom in New York was reunited with her son after he was living on the streets of Portland for 3 years. Mayor Keith Wilson says it's one of the success stories from reuniting people who are homeless with their loved ones out of state.
So he had a record, so the DA immediately went to work to reduce his livability nuisance crimes, right? We had Portland police who assisted. We got him a plane ride home within hours, and his friend picked him up at the airport, took him to his apartment where his mother was, and his friend videotaped it, knocking on the door, and his mother and Giovanni reuniting after 3 years. And it was one of the more heartwarming stories that I could say.
Well, Stephanie Domerat and the mayor tackle a lot in this week's episode of Straight Talk, including his plans to end the homeless crisis and how to balance the city budget. That's tonight on Straight Talk at 7 o'clock, less than 30 minutes from now, right after the story. Or you can watch it anytime on our streaming app, KGW Plus. Well, now to an update in our Uncommitted series looking at mental health care in Oregon. The Oregon State Hospital near Salem houses both people who have pled guilty except for insanity and those who need to be restored to a level of mental wellness to allow their criminal cases to proceed. But now the person in charge of running the state hospital is out and a new leader has taken her place. Evan Watson explains.
Governor Tina Kotek says the Oregon State Hospital needs new leadership to protect patient safety. She announced a hospital superintendent change late Friday night after reviewing a recent patient's unexpected death. The Oregon State Hospital is under fire for patient care. Federal regulators have repeatedly placed the hospital on notice for violations threatening accreditation and funding. 21 people have died at the hospital since 2020. 9 of those are classified as unexpected deaths, not natural causes. This latest death last month happened after a patient was placed in a seclusion room, fell to the floor, lost consciousness, and was not checked on for hours before being found dead. Governor Kotek is replacing Dr. Sarah Walker as the hospital's leader with Dave Baden, the Oregon Health Authority's former chief financial officer. In a statement, Kotek explicitly said she made the change after learning more details around a recent fatality, adding, "I have also directed the agency to make a 30-day plan to address issues related to patient care and safety effective immediately. Patients and their families deserve a hospital that meets the highest possible standard of care." Evan Watson, KGW News.
Now, if you would like to see more of Evan's Uncommitted series, text the word Uncommitted to 503-226-5088, and we'll send you a link to all of those stories. Those directions one more time is text the word Uncommitted to 503-226-5088. Now let's talk federal politics and a recent vote by Southwest Washington Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez that caught our attention. Although she called it, quote, deeply flawed and said it wasn't likely to pass the Senate, Perez was one of 4 Democrats who voted with Republicans in the House for the SAVE Act. That's the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act. And it's meant to make sure only U.S. citizens are voting in elections. It would require you to provide proof of citizenship when registering to vote in federal elections. You'd have to present a valid U.S. passport or a government-issued ID ID card alongside a certified birth certificate, and your name has to match. The bill passed the House last week. Republicans say non-citizen voting is a problem, and they're worried it could change the outcome of elections. Well, today we talked with Reed College professor Paul Gronke, who runs the Elections Voting and Information Center, and he says the data just doesn't support that claim.
Well, there's been many studies of these, both in the Northwest and nationwide, and it is a minuscule problem. It's tiny. There are folks that will slip through the cracks for a variety of reasons. We had an unfortunate circumstance in Oregon, but that was really related almost literally to an input form and clerks at the Oregon DMV not being properly trained in how to discriminate among certain kinds of passports where people are eligible or not. But it didn't impact any election outcomes, and there's no evidence really that it's impacting any outcomes anywhere.
He's talking about the problems with Oregon's motor voter law. The Department of Motor Vehicles incorrectly registered just over 1,600 people to vote, people who were not U.S. citizens, and at least 17 of them cast a ballot. And just last week, ODOT reported an additional 118 cases of people being registered in error, stretching back to 2010. Critics of the SAVE Act say the requirement to prove citizenship would create a big hassle for a lot of people and discourage voting, especially for older people, people in rural areas, and people who have changed their name, like some married women. Gronke agrees.
Any burden needs to be weighed against the problem. And as we already said, the problem here is minuscule to non-existent. But the burden, well, the evidence that we have from multiple organizations really across the political spectrum and just nonpartisan researchers are that somewhere around 20 to 22 million Americans don't have that documentation. In most cases, they don't have a birth certificate available anymore. The numbers vary. The estimates are around 6 to 7 million married women may have a birth certificate that does not match their driver's license or current identity documents because they changed their name when they got married. That's an issue for everybody knows why, more burdensome for women than for men. And attaining these documents is not easy and it can cost some money.
Washington Rep. Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez says she voted for the bill because it's what her constituents wanted. She told us, "I do not support non-citizens voting in American elections, and that's common sense to folks in Southwest Washington. Voting in our nation's elections is a sacred right belonging only to American citizens, and my vote for the SAVE Act reflects that principle." But she went on to imply that her vote doesn't really matter at all, writing, "I also understand the SAVE Act stands no chance of passage in the Senate due to the filibuster, as well as several deeply flawed provisions. One of those provisions," she said, "would invalidate ballots postmarked by Election Day if they are not received by Election Day." She said she stands by Washington's vote by mail system, calling it safe, secure, and reliable. When it comes to Oregon's representatives in the House, they voted along party lines on the SAVE Act. The bill is now with the Senate for consideration, and in order to overcome the filibuster that Gluesenkamp-Perez mentioned, 7 Democratic senators would need to join all Republicans to meet the threshold. A tall task that many argue won't happen, but we'll be watching. Well, coming up next on the story, it's an issue that often has many of you split every time it comes up in the Oregon legislature. Should lane splitting be allowed for motorcycles on Oregon roads? Well, the bill is back this session with the same passion for and against that we've seen in years past. So, what's different this time around? That's when the story returns. Well, heading to Salem now, where a bill looks to legalize lane splitting. That's when motorcycles ride between other vehicles on a congested highway. Now, if you're thinking that you've heard about this bill before, it's because you have. But despite coming up time and time again in the legislature, it's never been able to weave its way to the finish line. Here's Chris McGinnis.
House Bill 3542 would allow motorcyclists to essentially ride on the dashed lines on congested Oregon highways under very specific conditions. A, the freeway is clogged with stop-and-go traffic moving at 10 miles an hour or less. And then B, motorcyclists can travel no more than 10 miles an hour faster than the overall traffic flow. This bill is virtually identical to a bill that breezed through the House and Senate with strong majority support in 2021. But was ultimately vetoed by then Governor Kate Brown. Now it's back for another go-round.
There are impassioned arguments for and against legalizing lane splitting in the state of Oregon.
Unlike drivers in cars, motorcyclists are constantly physically engaged, balancing, clutching, braking, and scanning their environment. This is mentally and physically draining, particularly in stop-and-go traffic.
In opposition are organizations like AAA of Oregon and Idaho and the Oregon Sheriff's Association. Here's Janet Jarvis on behalf of the Oregon Trucking Association.
Lane splitting or lane filtering on the right side of a large truck is an extremely dangerous practice. Drivers changing lanes or reacting to road conditions with motorcyclists in their blind spot could lead to a serious accident or fatality.
Riders have a different perspective.
I will point out the blind spots proceed in a cone from a vehicle, and that cone is narrowest when you are closest to the lane markers. This gets us out of those dangerous situations and out of those blind spots where people can see us and where we can be safe.
Jonas Akers, a motorcyclist from Aloha, knows the image problem that law-abiding riders face.
If, like me, you have been frustrated to see somebody cut recklessly between lanes on an Oregon highway, be assured this bill is the end of that party.
A big change to previous versions of this legislation, the punishment. Improper passing escalates to a Class A misdemeanor with a $2,000 fine.
Make no mistake, the people who wish to behave recklessly do not like this bill.
This topic has been bounced around the state for at least a decade. Lane splitting is legal in California, and some variation of lane filtering or splitting is currently legal in Utah, Montana, and Arizona. Colorado is running a pilot on filtering. It's legal now. It will expire in 2027 so that safety data can be analyzed. Chris McGinnis, KGW News.
Okay, well, let's get to Chief Meteorologist Matt Zaffino now. Matt, it's looking like a great week for folks who ride motorcycles or even bicycles for that matter.
Thinking the same thing. Everybody's going to want to get out on two wheels if you can with weather like this. We're still sitting at 76 degrees right now. Humidity is super low, and we won't see any big changes until we get into the weekend. It's really quite remarkable. There's our high, 77. Not a record, but close. The record for today is 74. The average is 61. So we were way closer to the record than we were to the average. In fact, here is the today's climate almanac for you. 77 the high, the average 61, the record 84. So like I said, we're way closer to that 84 than we were to the 61. Of course, there's been no rain, and we're running a little bit below average for rainfall for the month of April. But with weather like this, it's hard to complain. So we started thinking about, okay, we're getting a bunch of 70-degree days. So what's the record for 70-degree days in April? That number is 13. And that was set 9 years ago in 2016. Several of the years with the most 70-degree days have come in the last 10, 20 years or so. Not all of them, but several of them. Now, what about consecutive 70-degree days? Because that's what we're getting into right now, right? The record is 8, and that was just set 4 years ago in 2021. How long will this streak go? Well, we should reach 6 because it'll go through Friday, and that'll tie 2016 for the second longest streak of consecutive 70-degree days in the month of April. So pretty impressive what we're doing right now. We may not be setting any daily records, Blair, but when we're doing consecutive days in a row like this, in some ways, it's even more impressive because it shows just the long-lasting nature of the weather pattern that we are in. So, yeah.
Can I ask you what you think is contributing to that?
You know, part of it is just natural variability, but it's hard to not think that climate change doesn't have a fingerprint on that, as it does on several of the weather records that we've been setting. And we set way more record warm temperatures and warm streaks than we do cold temperature records or cold streaks.
That's a good point.
And that's been happening all over the country, all over the world, really, for a long, long time. So it's hard to think that there's not a contribution of climate change to streaks like this. But it's pretty nice when we're in the 70s like this. I mean, nobody's complaining about it too much, as we'll be warm all week. And again, about 10, 15 degrees above average. And over the Easter weekend, Blair, that's when the showers return. Not the best timing, but again, a great streak ahead.
Okay, Matt, thanks so much.
You bet.
All right, we've seen your emails asking about our Digging for Old segment. Well, you ask and you shall receive. It is back tonight. With the great weather ahead of us this week, we're taking a look at what picnic-related items are in the Historical Society's archives. And we found something you may not be expecting. That's when the story returns. Well, it's that time again here on The Story. We are digging for old. With the beautiful weather this week, some will be out having themselves a picnic to enjoy the sunshine. So we dove into the Historical Society's archives for anything with picnic in the description. Of course, there are many different picnic baskets in the collection, but this one is fairly unique. It's from the 1880s and is much smaller than your run-of-the-mill wicker basket. It's made of tin. And what did it hold, you ask? Holiday-themed chewing tobacco, which back then, in cases like this, were called tobacco plugs. All right, this next one is connected to quite the tragedy, which is not really what comes to mind when you think picnic. But this folded piece of rice paper is believed to be part of the Japanese balloon bomb that killed 5 children and a pregnant woman in Klamath County during World War II. The victims were on a church youth group picnic on Gerhardt Mountain near Blyback in May of 1945. They were the only mainland U.S. fatalities of World War II. My goodness. And finally tonight, the Historical Society has this in its collection, a 34-star American flag from 1861. It is believed to be the first U.S. flag raised in Portland after Oregon became a state. It was sewn by Mrs. Anne Elizabeth Bills in the lead up to July 4th that year. Now, you history buffs out there are wondering how it's the first American flag to be raised here in Portland after statehood, despite that happening in 1859. But a note with the flag at the Historical Society says that Anne's husband and his employee, quote, went to the Selwood area and cut down a young fir tree, from which they carved the staff for the flag. Mrs. Bills would later remember flags were not easily secured in those days, but I saw one was badly needed here, so I went right to work to supply the want. It was hard work, but with every stitch I grew more anxious to finish the task I had undertaken. It goes on to say that the finished product was celebrated with a barbecue picnic at 4th Street between Burnside and Ankeny, attended by dozens of people from miles around. That location today, by the way, is right behind Dante's Club on West Burnside. Very cool. Well, that's the end of our show, folks. Thanks so much for watching. Straight Talk is coming your way next. And don't forget, everyone has a story to tell. If you ever miss an episode of The Story at 6:30, we re-air the episode at 8:30 and 10:30 p.m. on our TV app, KGW+. It'll also be there the next morning at 11:30. And you can download the free KGW+ app right now. It's free on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. Have a great Monday night. I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.